Sean's going to call you to order pretty soon. Everybody get ready. Hey, James. I'm good, man. You all right?
What time does the 7 o'clock meeting start?
7 o'clock. 7 o'clock. Thank you, Sean. Thank you to all of you who came. We open every meeting of Position of Neutrality with a prayer. Chaplain Lee is in the house.
Come on and stand to your feet all over the room. Amen. Welcome. Father, we thank you today for everything you've done, everything you're doing, but most of all for what you're about to do. As we embark into step 3 on tonight, we ask you, Lord, just to come in and have your way. We ask you, Lord, that you will move through these aisles, touch the hearts of each and every person here, believing, God, that you have a word from them through your manservant on tonight. Let them feel your presence in this place. Let them feel that power that moves us, that takes us, that keeps us. We thank you for everything you're about to do. Now, God, we ask you, Lord, that you will bless those that are on their way and everyone that's here. And we know, God, on tonight, it's going to be a blessed one. So we give you all the praise in advance in the mighty name of Jesus. Let everyone say, Amen.
Amen. Thank you, chap. So is anyone here at this group for the first time tonight? A bunch of you, thank you. So first of all, welcome. And second, let us warn you in advance, you're liable to experience us just a little different than other meetings of other fellowships you may have attended. The primary reason that's liable to happen is we intend for you to have a different experience here. What we've been doing here for lots of years and what I'll attempt to do tonight is to show you how I find my experience in this book and encourage you to have your experience with this book. And we use this book in 12-step recovery. Why? Yeah, the process described by the authors of this book has been proven to work for addicts of the hopeless variety, addicts to alcohol and other substances. Yes? Can we agree on that? So the idea is to find our experience in it. And the authors in the forward to the first edition say to show others precisely how we have recovered is the main purpose of the book. So they intended for us to, someone sat down with me and showed me, and it is my effort to sit down and show you how I find my experience, not yours, but to encourage you to have yours. And if we both do our job, we share a spiritual experience in these rooms every time we meet. How many of you have been here before and witnessed that happens? So those of you joining us online, you can't see their hands. Those of you in the room, they're raising their hands to signify when we speak of a spiritual experience in 12-step recovery, we're speaking of a sensory experience. You will feel it. When you do, I'll know, and I'll call it to your attention. Because we would teach you to talk to you about the power we call God without giving you a demonstration of the power. The other thing we do here, so we can set aside prejudice, is when I say God, they say because for our purposes, if lack of power is my dilemma, what I'm looking for is power, not theology. So if people are confused with the word God, we want to insert the idea and the reality of power to live. Yes? All right, and tonight we're going to take a look at that because we are in step 3. We're going to take a look at what we've learned so far and what we've encountered so far, and then what the decision looks like so we know what informed decision-making looks like. Does that make sense? And we start in chapter 5. How many of you have been to an AA meeting before? Good percentage of you. Okay, so it's probably familiar to you. Most AA meetings I've ever been, they read a little portion of chapter 5. Yes? They call it How It Works. And what they're reading to us in most of those meetings is the portion summarizing the first step, the second step leading us to what the third step decision looks like. Does that make sense? So it's 1 and 2, and then a wrap-up leading us to a decision. So we're in the chapter How It Works, and they start out with promise and condition. Let's see if you can identify promise and condition. Rarely have we seen a person fail who's thoroughly followed our path. What was the promise? Rarely have we seen a person fail. Who's the we? The first 100 and their experience with the first several thousand, the title of the book. Yes? Okay. And then it says, who has thoroughly followed our path. Did you hear the condition?
Yep, singular path.
Yeah, that's where some of us get a little bit misled, perhaps. 100 people telling the story of thousands, one path. Did you catch that? And who's the hour? The first 100 and the story of all those thousands. And they're telling you, all those people, one path. They're not saying our paths. How many of you have heard people say, hey, you can do AA any way you want to? That's absolutely true, but it may not be AA and it may not produce the results you're looking for. Does that make sense? No, there ain't no rules. If we're clinging to the experience we want, we better read the book and then not make it up. Yeah? Okay. So then they tell us a little more about the demographic. Those who do not recover are people who cannot or will not completely give themselves to this simple program, usually men and women who are constitutionally incapable of being honest with themselves. So more promises, more conditions. Have you ever imagined yourself to be a cannot or a will not? How many of you thought you were a will not until you found out you were a cannot? How many of you took comfort from being right half the time? We judge, don't we? We judge ourselves and we judge others. And cannot or will not really doesn't matter if the outcome is that I'm out there spun again. So what's it say to us? Completely give ourselves to this simple program. It's so important you understand that the fellowship is not the program, regardless how many times people suggest that. This simple program, as described in this book, is our anchor to the promises they promise. Sitting in the rooms, no matter how many times we say I'm in the program, has no such tether. Does that make sense? Do it any way you want, but if you want what they have and are willing to go to anything to get it, you're going to have to focus on the program, not the fellowship. Does that make sense? Okay. That's correct. Yes. So then they say that usually men and women who are constitutionally incapable of being honest with themselves. Honest with themselves about what?
That they're powerless over alcohol and their life is unmanageable.
And Sean's absolutely right, and he also doesn't have all the answers. So all of you, whatever you're thinking, that's what we got to focus on. They've really talked to us about two different things that make up the very admission Sean's talking about. They're talking about the sensory experience of the phenomenon of craving and my inability to sit well abstinent. Any of you had some clean time and found abstinence less than desirable condition? So they talk to us about if we're this alcoholic type, we're going to be restless, irritable, and discontented unless they can again experience the sense of ease and comfort that comes at once by taking a few drinks which they see others taking with impunity. You remember reading that? How many of you sitting here sober tonight can bring to consciousness that sense of ease and comfort that comes at once? Just give yourself permission to go get whatever it is that brought you here.
Yes!
So if you're sitting here sober, many of you for many years, but you can still feel the ease and comfort the minute you allow yourself to experience that rush from the needle or that warm fade away to black. It goes by pouring bourbon, gin, whiskey, or name it, whatever it is. If you can bring that to consciousness here, I got to be honest about that, then get honest about the fact that sometimes in my life I'm disturbed by the way life is fully present, And all I want is ease and comfort. All I want is an escape from it. And there's no escape from it. All I can do is grow through it. And I get restless, irritable, and discontented. Remember last week they told me this power I would encounter had the power to philosophically comfort me. Did any of you remember that? If you're internalizing, I may be this addict of the hopeless variety, and I really could use this power to philosophically comfort, then that's what they're talking about in this point, yes? And then the other thing they talk about, well, we can go to that rather than me try and just memorize it for you. Go to page 52. Nope, 50. Sean keeps doing that to me. 50. So it says, here are thousands of men and women worldly indeed. They flatly declare that since they have come to believe in a power greater than themselves, so notice they're talking about a process, and they're talking about some recognition and then some improved or some evidence of this power in and on my life, yes? So they've come to believe in a power greater than themselves, to take a certain attitude toward that power, and to do certain simple things. There's been a revolutionary change in their way of living and thinking. How many of you could use such a revolution? How many have been sober a long time and still need a revolution in the way you live and think from time to time? So it's a manner of living. Alcohol was a symptom. Heroin was a symptom. Fentanyl was a symptom. I've got to find a way to live. I've got to have that power to live. Does that make sense? In the face of collapse and despair, in the face of total failure of their human resources, they found that a new power, peace, happiness, and sense of direction flowed into them. Where they tell us about where the power was found. And how do we find it? Sometimes we have to search fearlessly. In the last analysis, it's only there that he may be found, and I'll know when I've hit the well because it will manifest as power, peace, happiness, and a sense of direction flowing into me. Does that sound like a plan that would work for you in lieu of abstinence? We don't seek abstinence in 12-step recovery, the program. We seek awakening. That's why it doesn't say having been struck sober as a result of these steps. It says having awakened spiritually as a result of these steps. Does that make sense? Okay. So those are the two things you got to get honest about. Have you had a bump of that power? And are you willing to believe that if you pursue that power, that you can improve your consciousness in such a way that you will not fall victim to restlessness, irritability, and discontent? That's really all you got to own, right? Okay. So then, it says there are those too who suffer from grave emotional and mental disorders, but many of them do recover if they have the capacity to be honest. Any of you, like Paul, met those people in the rooms that obviously had grave emotional and mental disorders? How many of you have stayed long enough to realize it's you? Yeah, you think we're chuckling, but we're not. None of us wants to believe we belong in a fellowship such as this when we first get here. And we see nothing but differences. But if you stay long enough, you start to realize the deplorable conditions from which we were pulled and how little we personally had to do with it. How little we personally had to do with it. Do you agree? Because we hear people talking about how hard they're working. I don't doubt they're working hard, but they're not working hard on their recovery because it takes no power to not do. So they're working hard on something, maybe staying out of the way of the doer. Anyway, so our stories disclose in a general way what we used to be like, what happened, and what we are like now. What is the product of my fourth step inventory? Yeah. What I used to be like. I was selfish, inconsiderate, dishonest. I was full of guilt, shame, and remorse. I encountered this power. I shared it with another human being. I agreed to move through the process, and I'm much less so now. And as a result of that, not only have I been redeemed, but literally thousands of people have got a shot at redemption because of what God does through me. That's a fact. That's what happened. That's what I was like. That's what happened. That's what I'm like now. Does that make sense? Okay, so if you've decided you want what we have and are willing to go to any length to get it, then you're ready to take certain steps. So how would we make that decision? I'd have to know what it is they claim to have, wouldn't I? So let's go look at page 25, see if we want any part of that nonsense. Because you can't go to the rooms. I used to hear people all the time, go to the rooms and find someone who's got what you want. And I'm operating in pure delusion. And what I want is relief from my poverty and a little companionship. Anyone know what I'm talking about? So that's bad advice. Well, here's what they had, and then I can decide if I'd really rather start on such a foundation. The great fact is just this and nothing less, that we've had deep and effective spiritual experiences which have revolutionized our whole attitude toward life, toward our fellows, and toward God's universe. Very good. Remember when they said that we needed a revolution? See how they're promising they received a revolution? So do you want a revolution? The central fact of our lives today is the absolute certainty that our Creator has entered into our hearts and lives in a way which is indeed miraculous. Now, you might not think anything of it at the time you read that story, but by the time we went through step 2 instructions, they told you half of them were atheists or agnostics in the beginning. They believed that God did not exist, or he could not be proven to exist. And they disproved both of those theories through their taking part in the process. Does that make sense? No matter if you think like them, don't be disconcerted. Our experience shows you need not be disconcerted. So they're telling you that they went from cannot be proven or does not exist to not only can he be proven and does he exist, but you could prove to me you don't exist before you could prove to me God doesn't exist because he lives and breathes through me. Does that make sense? He has commenced to accomplish those things for us which we could never do by ourselves. How many of you have been amazed at what you were able to accomplish that was seemingly impossible for you not all that long ago? And even if no one else is amazed, we're freaking amazed. Like, I have a job for more than a month. The rent's paid and there's money left over. I don't have 7 different aliases. If you're seriously alcoholic as we were, we believe there is no middle-of-the-road solution. So I'm going to jump back to where we were, but we just wanted to come to a common understanding. Is that something we would like to have, that kind of certainty they're talking about? Has anyone ever explained to you in Alcoholics Anonymous the difference between hope and certainty? You know, or do you want me to help? I had hope periodically in my addiction, and when the going got tough, my hope diminished, and I returned to the familiar. When I was infused with certainty, all the odds were against me, all the people were against me, and I walked into it anyway because I was certain that my reward was just on the other side of my fear. Anyone else do that? Okay. All right, so now we're back to, then we're ready to take certain steps if we're agreed on those things. And then they acknowledge right away our frailty. At some of these we balked. Okay, exactly. How many of you can just cite right now what some of these are? How many of you had a secret you were taking to the grave? How many of you thought that you had done so much harm the list would be too long and it'd be futile? How many of you never got that far? Didn't even bother to do an inventory because I got this. I'm not going to write it down because I don't want anyone to find it. How many of you went the other way? Going, dude, if you'd have told me I had to pay it all back, I'd have never stole so much. All of those things will keep us from launching. So we can laugh about it, but all of us know what kept us from launching, right? And sometimes we just get to where we're a little comfortable, and a little comfortable is better than where we were, and it's not anywhere near as good as where we're going, but we don't want to give up comfortable for temporary discomfort. Okay. So then it says we thought we could find an easier, softer way, which is we just enumerated some of those. But we could not. So who's the we? Does it comfort you to know that the authors of this book had the same thoughts and emotions you do, and that they overcame them by shoring each other up and saying just because you're thinking that way, you're not your thoughts. Just because you're feeling that way, you're not your feelings. Does that make sense? And it's okay to think and feel, just don't let it steal from you a better version of you just on the other side of your fear. Okay, so with all the earnestness at our command, we beg of you to be fearless and thorough from the very start. Fearless does not mean without fear. It means move toward it. It's counter to human nature, isn't it? Right? We're either fight or flight. I'm going to fight with it, or I'm going to run from it. In this world, in the realm of the Spirit, we're neither going to fight with it or run from it. We're going to face it, and we're going to see it for the illusion that it is. Does that make sense? Some of us have tried to hold on to our old ideas, and the result was nil until we let go absolutely. What do they mean by they got no results until they let go absolutely? You ever had an old idea block you from moving forward into something you desperately wanted? Absolutely. So we all know the experience. So we really don't gain anything if we don't take the time to build a foundation and it all gets swept away the first sign of trouble. Have we gained anything? How many of you have done enough of this now you found out you didn't even know your old ideas until you went out and started trying to help people? Until I go out and try and help people, I don't even confront my old ideas because I don't even learn that everything I see in them, I'm looking through the lens of my thoughts. I'm not seeing them, I'm seeing me. And that vision starts to clear, then my judgment goes away and I'm not suffering from judgment anymore, and it makes me a better servant. And none of that was done to make me a better servant. I did all of that because I was trying to get a little relief for me. Anyone know what I'm talking about? Yet, no, even the worst people I ever worked with taught me more about me than about them. Does that make sense? All right, so it says, remember that we deal with alcohol, cunning, baffling, powerful. Without help, it's too much for us. But there is one who has all power. That one is? Power. They're on it tonight. That one is power. All right. So may you find him now. Where are we going looking? Deep down inside. How are we going to find him? Sometimes we're going to have to search fearlessly. So it's all starting to make sense now, right? The very first step of action is going to be a searching and fearless moral inventory of me. And now they've told me where I'm going looking. Because all my life I've been looking out there for something to change so I can feel better. Anyone else? Half measures availed us nothing. How many of you have kind of concluded from time to time half measures seem to avail us about half? Again, we settle, don't we? How many of you didn't know they were half measures until you were ready to receive some more truth? We stood at the turning point. What's the turning point?
Stopping drinking.
Initially, but it's clinging to that old idea, right? That identity that kept me locked up and bound up in this skin suit for years so that I could prove to you that I was this or I was that, was stopping me from going and being a spiritual vessel. And as long as I wanted to keep one foot over here while I'm leaning over here, I never went anywhere. I'm at the turning point. I'm going to have to pray to move me one direction or the other. Does it make sense? So this is what they said they did. We ask his protection and care with complete abandon. It doesn't matter what my friends are going to think of me. It doesn't matter what my acquaintances are going to think of me. It doesn't matter what my parents are going to think of me. It doesn't matter what my siblings are going to think of me. I'm going after this spiritual life wherever it takes me. Does that make sense? So here are the steps we took, which are suggested as a program of recovery. I'm not going to read all the steps because it just seems redundant. But I'm going to go to page 60. And they're going to talk about our experience of having now read the steps and maybe somewhat understood intellectually what the steps are supposing for us. Right? How many of you looked at the steps on the wall for the very first time and thought, oh, what kind of cult have I wandered into? Because it can be a little daunting, can't it? So their expression is, many of us exclaimed, what an order, I can't go through with it. How many of you said, I really want to do it, yes, I'm going to do it, and I want someone to hold me accountable, and then when you had an assignment, somehow you found yourself not empowered to do the assignment? Any of you say you were working on your fourth step for like 8 months? Yeah, and that's all I want us to do, is because we'll get here and then we'll say, oh, that doesn't work. Well, I'm not qualified to tell you what won't work if I haven't actually done what's suggested. Yep. What I would be more accurate in saying is, I won't work. Yep. Okay? So that says, do not be discouraged. No one among us has been able to maintain anything like perfect adherence to these principles. So no matter what you think is going on, no one's expecting you to suddenly be sainted. Right. What they are hoping for you is that you'll be a good vessel of redemption and avert suffering for others as a result of the grace you've experienced in your life. Right. That's what we're hoping for, right? So we're not saints. The point is we're willing to grow along spiritual lines. So are you at least willing to grow along spiritual lines now that you know that matters of the Spirit are a reality? The principles we've set down are guides to progress. So where are the principles they've set down? Yeah, they're contained in the 12 steps and are the 12 steps, right? We claim spiritual progress rather than spiritual perfection. Are you serving others? Have you outgrown the fear that your personal experience as you impart it to another won't be helpful enough to them? How many of you are still living in enough self-condemnation you're afraid you're going to hurt them? I'm going to break them. I don't sponsor people. Let me get my friend, he sponsors people. I'm talking to somebody in here. Those of us who sponsor people, that happens to us all the time. Let me tell you something. You will never unpack that which has been pegging you to the ground until you get over that fear. Your story, your testimony is important to the very man or woman you're running from. And your healing is dependent on it. Because when you use that experience to help another, the healing you need comes through you. So, our description of the alcoholic, the chapter to the agnostic, and our personal adventures before and after made clear 3 pertinent ideas. So we've boiled it down to 3 pertinent ideas. A, that we were alcoholic and could not manage our own lives. They separated those 2 ideas. Remember how they separated them to us in the step instruction? We did 53 pages plus the forwards talking about what an alcoholic was and what an alcoholic was not. Yes? And talking about the one symptom in common. And then we spent a few more pages talking about a human condition that required anesthesia if I didn't get spiritually free. Yes? So I copped to unmanageability in one because my outside circumstances showed unmanageability, but what I didn't realize is that unmanageability was in me, and I painted the world I lived in to match how I felt. Does that make sense? How many of you had always been kind of neat and kind of orderly and kind of what, and then in addiction, didn't bathe, didn't clean anything up, didn't... Yeah? We do get a little disheveled, don't we? Look, I've seen the photos, guys. You know what I mean? That probably no human power could have relieved our alcoholism. Notice how they worded that. Probably. I'm going to go through the process. I'm going to hope for a get out. But the reality is my alcoholism has very little to do with alcohol consumption. It has to do with the insanity of why I consume alcohol when it's so obviously a destructive force in my life. Which means it doesn't have to do so much with drinking as it does with thinking. And that God would if he were sought. So they've told us where to seek. They've told us who we're seeking, right? And the essence of the third step decision is they've mapped out a process, and I'm going to seek inward instead of outward for my ease and comfort. And when I find myself looking outward, I'm going to come back in fearlessly and go back in, because in the last analysis, it's only there that he may be found. Does that make sense? Being convinced we're at step 3. Convinced of what? A, B, and C. How many of you took the third step decision, said a prayer, did whatever someone told you without really understanding what I was supposed to be convinced of? Almost all of us do that. It's the first act of faith. The reality is I don't really know what it looks like until I've had my eyes open through the inventory, discussed it with somebody else, and actually go out and try and serve, and then all of a sudden I'll get a sense of what it really means. Make sense? So it says, which is that we decided to turn our will and our life over to God as we understood him. Now, I'm sorry for all the people all these years that have been told the God of my understanding. That's not what they said. They've told you clearly how they understood this power, and it was sensory. It was power, peace, happiness, sense of direction. In all of their stories in the program section, not necessarily in the story section, but in the program section, they talk about the clean wind of a mountaintop blow through and through. They talk about the man stumbling out of bed to his knees when he got the voice of God in his inner consciousness, right? So they understood this power to be a reality living in them. And that is the understanding from which they go forth. Does that make sense? As we understood. And then it says, which is just what do we mean by that, and just what do we do? So what do we mean? What do we do? That's what they said. What do we mean? What do we do? So it's time to make a decision. What we mean and what we do. And I'm going to decide to move forward in the process, or I'm not. And I'm not going to try and impress you with my decision. I'm not even going to try and impress me with my decision. I'm just going to be acting in such a way that you won't have to guess what my decision was. Does that make sense? So the first requirement is that we be convinced that any life run on self-will can hardly be a success. So are you convinced? Based on what? Based on your experience. Now read the sentence again. It says any life. So a higher calling, not just my experience, but I've got to believe that I don't have to compare myself to you to feel empathetic for what you're going through, no matter what you profess. And I also am not affected by what you say or do. I'm not going to dissuade me from my path. Does that make sense? Because we get imprisoned in the thoughts of people and the idea that we can control them, and we don't move. People are going to think what they think. And since I don't even control how I think about me, it's complete insanity to think I can act in some kind of way to change how you think about me. And you want to know why? Because most of you don't think about me that often. Not nearly as often as I think about me. All right, so on that basis, we're almost always in collision with something or somebody, even though our motives are good. How many of you have discovered that? Checked your motives? Yep, good motives. And then people weren't happy. And now you're mad at them. I was just trying to help you, you son of a bitch. So they're going to talk to us about this human condition. Most people try to live by self-propulsion. Each person is like an actor who wants to run the whole show, is forever trying to arrange the lights, the ballet, the scenery, and the rest of the players in his own way. If his arrangements would only stay put, if only people would do as he wished, the show would be great. And you ever thought that? Everybody, including himself, would be pleased. How many of you have lived in that delusion? Have you ever done it all perfectly and no one was pleased? Did you ever ask yourself, perfect according to whom? See, the insanity of addiction is a lack of proportion. My world gets very small. I assume if I think I know what you need, that you're going to be happy receiving it from me. I have discovered that's not true. They may not see what I'm offering as relief in any way whatsoever. So they're going to receive it as they perceive it, just as I would. And I'll run around angry a lot of the time if I think I'm a giver telling you what you need. Does that make sense? So life would be wonderful. In trying to make these arrangements, our actor may sometimes be quite virtuous. He may be kind, considerate, patient, generous, even modest, and self-sacrificing.
Thank you.
Anyone like Sean like to see yourself that way? Sean does it almost in jest, but we're trying to accentuate a point. Sometimes we see ourselves more there. We're going to talk about another side that sometimes we see ourselves more there, and then we're going to realize we're human and we have varied traits, yes? So it says, on the other hand, he may be mean, egotistical, selfish, and dishonest. Any of you see yourself there? How many of you see yourself there, honestly, more easily than on kind and... isn't that weird how we can do that to ourselves? So it says, but as with most humans, he's more likely to have varied traits. So our self-assessment is out of balance. Does that make sense? So all the more reason I need to capture the thoughts and submit them to the power within. Because I'm clearly seeing myself in a one-sided way as a human being. So what usually happens? The show doesn't come off very well. He begins to think that life doesn't treat him right. How many of you have gotten from everything's great, I'm on top of the world, I got this, to why me? Sometimes in the course of a day, right? And then they say he decides to exert himself more. How many of you, after you got deflated, tried to force more and got even more defeated? He becomes on the next occasion still more demanding or gracious as the case may be, and still the play does not suit him. So who am I trying to please? I'm trying to please me. I'm trying to please me. And that manifestation that is me is the main problem. This entity apart from the divine. Yes? And still the plays do not suit him. Admitting he may be somewhat at fault, he's sure that other people are more to blame. How many of you have lost your power to situations by assigning blame? And how many of you didn't know you were doing it? Right? It's easy to do. We got to be awakened and realize that all those things in the world, they don't have any power to cause me to think or feel. All they can do is reflect how I'm thinking and feeling. And I've got to continually rearm or I will fall into slumber. You're either a victim or a victor. There's no in the middle. Your addiction is a calling or a curse. There's no in the middle. But if you're armed with the testimony and you walk in that testimony, you're in your calling. And signs and wonders will follow you. Those of you who are students of the other book. All right, so he becomes angry, indignant, self-pitying. What is his basic trouble? What's his basic trouble? I'm thinking more of me and less of you. Is he not really a self-seeker even when trying to be kind? How many of you offered kindness but didn't realize there was a condition attached by you, and when they did not meet it, you were disappointed in them? Manipulating them. Is he not a victim of the delusion that he can wrest satisfaction and happiness out of this world if only he manages well? Yeah. Did you realize that that was a delusion? Not initially. We probably don't, right? We probably don't realize it's a delusion because we're told, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, make your own happiness, do all these things. We got success books written on it. The reality is we don't have to make anything. We have to be things. What I got to do is quit getting all these thoughts and emotions in the way of my happiness and recognize my normal state of being is joy and peace. I trade it for worldly things and lose my inheritance in it. Does that make sense? So is it not evident to all the rest of the players that these are the things he wants? How many people have had the experience of running around acting like you were in charge and other people figured it out? That you were acting that way and you weren't in charge. And do not his actions make each of them wish to retaliate, snatching all they can get out of the show? You run into those people that while you're pretending to be in charge, they were pretending to be in charge in the same situation? We run into them, don't we? Is he not in his best moments a producer of confusion rather than harmony? How many of you went in to straighten some stuff out and all hell broke loose? Yeah, man, me too. Our actor is self-centered, egocentric, as people like to call it nowadays. He's like the retired businessman who lolls in the Florida sunshine in the winter, complaining of the sad state of the nation. The minister who sighs over the sins of the 20th century. Politicians and reformers who are sure all would be utopia if the rest of the world would only behave. The outlaw safecracker who thinks society has wronged him, and the alcoholic who has lost all and is locked up. Whatever our protestations, are not most of us concerned with ourselves, our resentments, or our self-pity? Yes. Is my internal storm based mainly on my lived experience and have little to do with the people I find myself among ultimately? How many of you started your addiction and everything was happy and ha ha ha, I'm having fun, ain't this great? I'm good at this. And then all of a sudden I'm having to hide from people and I'm miserable. And I got to pretend I'm not miserable when I look miserable. Some of you went to the same corners I went to. Yeah, it don't matter. They got them corners everywhere. Whatever our protestations, I'm concerned with myself, my resentments, and my self-pity. And as long as I'm in that prison, it doesn't matter what other prison I'm in, I can't get out. That's why we started ministry in the prisons through the 12-step approach and built a center for people coming out of prison, because we are convinced if we don't free you in there, you'll never live free out here. So we try and free you in there, and then when you get here, we try and give you a runway, what it's like to walk free, because it's so unfamiliar to be able to make decisions. And I'm not talking about just people in incarceration. If you come out of addiction and you took it out hard, dude, we walk it into a world we don't know. Yeah, man. Yeah, man. And that's all we're trying to say. There's all kinds of prisons. We were talking to a lifer one time, wishing him a happy birthday. And we said, man, I sure wish that we were getting better news for you. And he said, don't worry about it, brother. We all doing time. Put it right back on us. Yeah. Little E. Any of you ever knew Little E? We're in the Tucson complex. It was a real dose of truth for me. We all doing time. So how do I want to do it? When do I want to move into the infinite? All right, so then it says, sometimes selfishness, self-centeredness, that we think is the root of our troubles. Driven by 100 forms of fear, self-delusion, self-seeking, and self-pity, we step on the toes of our fellows and they retaliate.
Sometimes they hurt us seemingly without provocation, but we invariably find that at some time in the past we've made decisions based on self, which later placed us in a position to be hurt. Guys, we got to be careful with this. They wrote this book in past tense, describing an experience they had. When we get the new people that have not had the benefit of the process, they've been harmed, and oftentimes harmed, and they had no part in the initial harm. And so this isn't about shedding guilt on anybody. We still got to love them through the process so they can get to the other side, because there are things that have happened to every one of you. You had no part in the hurt, but the grace that sustained you through it is a gift to the rest of the world through you, which will provide your healing. And if you cling to your unforgiveness, you'll find you're tethered to the pain and not the joy. Does that make sense? So when we're going through it, we sometimes get legalistic. We're not trying to be here. We want to acknowledge your pain. Then we want to go deep and have you expose your pain. And then we want to give you a plan for healing from that pain by walking supported through it until it's useful to alleviate suffering for others. Does that make sense? That's why the peer model works, guys. Because everyone's a living example of how to walk through shit. Yes? Anyone in this room that did not walk through shit? Because we got a pass for you if you... All right. So our troubles, we think, are basically of our own making. They arise out of ourselves, and the alcoholic is an extreme example of self-will run riot, though he usually doesn't think so. So at first they were talking about regular people, how they're regular examples of self-will run riot. Now they're talking squarely to me, maybe you. I'm alcoholic. I'm a human with an alcoholic condition. I'm an extreme example of self-will run riot, and I don't think so. What are my chances? Their chances are less than average. Now it starts to make sense, doesn't it? That's got to change, and I can't change it. That's what powerless means. I can't change what I don't know. I can't acknowledge what I don't know. That's what delusion is. So above everything, we alcoholics must be rid of this selfishness. We're starting to separate me from the humans. They told me what the symptom was. Now they're starting to talk to me about what the solution is. And I got to let go of my selfishness and move towards selflessness in my actions and let my thinking catch up. Does that make sense? All right, so we must, or it kills us. God makes that possible. Power makes that possible. Some people think that it's just magically going to go away if I just sit here and pray. That's not my experience, and it's not their experience. I'm still going to have to take action. I'm going to have to go be a vessel for this power. I'm going to have to be on display. I'm going to have to put my hand out, and not to tell you how recovered and redeemed and enlightened I am, but for you to come to me because you've recognized it on me, and me to say, if you can recognize that you have it, it's now my job to work with you so you can wake up to it. Does it make sense? His power, his love, his way of life. We'll get there. All right, so, and there often seems no way of entirely getting rid of self without his aid. That's an interesting caution. Sounds like they tried, doesn't it? This is a book of how many experiments they made to reach the freedom they describe. Does it make sense? Many of us had moral and philosophical convictions galore. How many of you got a little legalistic in your recovery journey? But we could not live up to them even though we would have liked to. Neither could we reduce our self-centeredness much by wishing or trying on our own power. We had to have God's help. You know why we say, when I say God, you say? Because we obviously, if lack of power is my dilemma, then I have to have power's help. That should take all the mystery out of it. And they've told me where the power is found and how it expresses itself. So it shouldn't prejudice us if we'll just open our ears to it. Does that make sense? And if you can't open your ears, own what you feel. Because some of you are feeling what we're laying down. Yes? So this is the how and the why of it. First of all, we had to quit playing God. It didn't work. There's no power in our playing, is there? But there's significant power in that reality. How about when you started walking in the reality and other people thought you were playing? Did it dissuade you? It can. That's why we want to continue to grow, right? I had a progressive illness. I better get a progressive recovery. I better improve consciousness, yes? How many of you believe differently than when you first heard this message? As a result of the process, right? As a result of the power proving himself to you and through you, right? Next, we decided that here and after in this drama life, God was going to be our director. So what's a director do? Director directs. So no more directing the lights and scenery in the ballet for me. He's the principal, we're his agents, he's the father, and we're his children. Most good ideas are simple, and this concept was the keystone, the new and triumphant arch through which we pass to freedom. What concept? Pick one, but go deep. How many of you have been confused about your identity? How many of you pretended to be things that you really knew yourself not to be, but you were convincing enough that other people thought you were that? So what they want us to understand is that who we are and whose we are is all we need to know. But it's not about thinking, it's about certainty. Does that make sense? Yeah. We are his children. He is the Father. Most good ideas are simple. If all of that I've strove for all my life is mine already by inheritance, why am I striving? Just asking you some simple questions, right? What do I believe versus what I'm coming to believe? How many of you have found when you quit fighting, things got delivered to you? How many of you have found that you are a whole lot less interested in some of the things you used to be very interested in? How many of you sought that outcome when you started? No, I just want to quit debasing myself on street corners. Okay, so when we sincerely took such a position, how does one demonstrate the sincerity of their position? How many of you cried to somebody, I really want to do better. I just want to give me one more chance. I just want to do better. And the next time they saw you, you were just hoping they didn't see you. So they're always going to know the sincerity of my position by what they catch me doing. Because that's just the way we roll. Show me, don't tell me. All sorts of remarkable things followed. Giving you a clue, if you're in the decision, signs and wonders follow you. How many of you have been working with people and know that to be true? Can't miss it, can you? We had a new employer being all powerful. He provided what we needed if we kept close to him and performed his work well. What do they mean? How do I keep close to this power, my new employer? Prayer and meditation. Get those calamities, pomps, and worships out of the way that are obscuring my consciousness so I can clearly hear the instruction. Power, peace, happiness, sense of direction flowing in. I got to walk in it. Yes? Established on such a footing, we became less and less interested in ourselves. Notice how they've now got me on a foundation. I know my identity, so I'm standing on the foundation, established on such a footing. Pretty deep stuff, isn't it, for a bunch of atheists and agnostics? We need to teach the profundity of this testimony because they told you who they were. They told you what they were like, what happened, and what they're like now, and they wrote down what they're like now, and it still resonates 80 years later. So it says, established on such a footing, we became less and less interested in ourselves, our little plans and designs. How many of you had little plans and designs that brought you little or nothing, and you got on board with another plan, and even though it may not look like what you thought, all of a sudden you could see how small your planning was in light of the plan that the divine had for you. Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it? So it says, more and more we became interested in seeing what we could contribute to life. How does one contribute to life? We pour into others, don't we? We never feel more alive than when we're pouring into others and we're taking what we thought was waste and we're lifting someone else and giving them wings. Right? Something we thought disqualified us by some fake theology we were living under, all of a sudden is lifting up God's people. Perfect timing. As we felt new power flow in. Listen to what they're saying. They're telling you it's sensory, aren't they? Don't believe the silliness in our fellowships. It's not a rock. It's not a doorknob. It's not a light bulb. It's power and purpose, obscured by my worldly experience. Once I get the calamities, pomps, and worships out of the way and can properly testify, the revelation happens in me. As we enjoyed peace of mind, as we discovered we could face life successfully. How many of you never really thought you could face life successfully? You kept trying, and I'm probably just going to die this way, so then you started in this new manner of living, and a little bit at a time you're checking off boxes. And they may not have been successes for anyone else, but they were successes for you. And hopefully you found a bunch of peers, and we celebrated those successes with you, because the world doesn't have to celebrate those milestones, but someone's got to tell us we mean something. As we became conscious of his presence, conscious, they're talking about the awareness of being aware. I'm not talking to you about theologies. I'm not talking to you about theories. I'm talking to you about power in and on my life that rips people from cages, breaks chains off of me and others, and uses imperfect me to do perfect work. Yes? We began to lose our fear of today, tomorrow, or the hereafter. We are reborn. What has to happen to necessitate a rebirth? I'm going to have to die to self. And I'm going to have to choose death of self. It's not going to happen any other way. You didn't kill me. I offer me. Does that make sense? We are now at step 3. Didn't they say that like 4 pages ago? But there were some things we hadn't properly considered, yes? So now we've all shook it up a little bit, and we understand that in order to get these promises they're talking about, I'm going to go through the rest of the process of 4, of 5, of 6, 7, and 8, 9. I'm going to learn to grow in prayer and meditation for the purpose of getting guidance and direction of who I'm going to go speak with and help. Yes? So, many of us said to our Maker as we understood him, and notice that's in italics, you got to get there, we're talking about an experience. They're talking about part of the power that comes into me is divine understanding. Have you ever understood that you thought of your addiction as a moral failing or something like that, and then all of a sudden you realized it was a calling on your life? And you found out that God wasn't somebody's abstract concept, but it was actually a power in your life? Did you not receive that as understanding, as wisdom? God, I offer myself to thee to build with me and to do with me as thou wilt. Relieve me of the bondage of self that I may better do thy will. Take away my difficulties, that victory over them may bear witness to those I would help of thy power, thy love, and thy way of life. May I do thy will always. One more caution. We thought well before taking this step, making sure we were ready, that we could at last abandon ourselves entirely, utterly to him. guys, take the time to consider the decision. And then if you don't like their prayer, write your own. They'll tell you that later. But it better mean something to you because you're agreeing to a death sentence so that you can truly live. See you next week.